Welcome to Diverse Orange, our conversations about diversity here in Central Florida. My guest today is Salma Hack.
Hello.
Welcome, Salma.
Hello, and thank you, Terry, for having me on.
Well, glad to have you. So let's start with your background and your heritage. Tell me about that.
Sure. I was born and raised in Little Guyana, which is a neighborhood in Queens, New York, Richmond Hill. My parents are originally from Guyana, which is a small country in South America. Guyana is actually the only English speaking country in South America, and it is comprised of seven or six nationalities. So I come from a very diverse background.
And like, what are some of the mixtures?
So some of the nationalities are we have Portuguese and Indian, African and Chinese, Dutch. Guyana was actually colonized by the British, and the reason that all of those ethnicities landed in Guyana is because they were brought to Guyana through the indentured servitude system. So they were brought there to work on the sugar and the rice plantations and fields. And through that servitude, they actually settled and created the new settlements of Indians in the West, as we like to call it. And through that, when they settle into a new space or a new home, with them they bring a little bit of their culture. They adopt to the resources that are around them and create a new culture or a new space or a new home for themselves too. And with that also comes their new food and foundation of recipes.
Your community in New York,
Mhm.
was it primarily one branch of those Guyanese?
So in New York, similar to the formation of Guyana, a lot of Guyanese and also West Indians throughout the Caribbean, when they migrated from the Caribbean or the West Indies and settled in New York, it then became a second home to them. They settled in Richmond Hill because a lot of those immigrants that came there were became a support to each other. So, you'd have a family member, you'd have a friend from back home, they would meet in Richmond Hill, and then together they would kind of help to show them the ropes. So it became a system of support again, settling from one country, coming to the next, and kind of helping each other as they are getting, acclimated into this new environment and new surroundings. So I
So
grew up.
growing up, you were pretty much around people culturally just like
Correct. Correct. So I grew up amongst a lot of Guyanese and Trinidadians, people from Suriname, ethnicities all throughout the Caribbean. But the beauty of growing up in Richmond Hill or in Queens is that, yes, we did have our little neighborhood, but, you can go a couple streets over or stops over on the train and you're in another neighborhood that is beautiful with another, ethnic background. So while we did have our little hub in Richmond Hill, we still, interacted with other ethnicities.
and when were you coming to Central Florida?
Sure. So I got married in 2005, and after I had gotten
That
engaged.
changes everything.
Yes, it does. I had gotten engaged, and New York is as beautiful, and for as much as I love it, it is quite expensive, especially for newlyweds. So after getting engaged, my husband and I, we looked to move here to Florida and actually moved to Sanford. So we got engaged, got married, moved to Sanford. And that's what brought me to Florida. And I found that it was actually, at the time, I'm a diehard New Yorker. I love it. But now being here for 18 years, I see the beauty in, raising a family here in Florida, not just like financially the difference, but also just in the sense of community, um, and the surroundings as well, too.
So what was your experience like when you came here?
So, I moved here when I was 21. And coming from, I grew up in a lifestyle that was just really hustle. So I would go to school, straight from school, you take the train and head to work, hop off the train, get back home, and then in this continuous cycle. So I came to Florida with that same mentality. And, it was hard for me to adjust at first to figure out, okay, how do I find my way and fit myself into this new environment. It's really a cultural shock because yes, we're still in the States, but it's a completely different state. And now I had to learn the ways of how Central Floridians live, in terms of the workspace too. I grew up on public transportation, so if you don't have a car in Florida, you're really just kind of like stuck. So it was a whole new vibe that I had to acclimate myself into, and it was a great learning process because I was a newlywed, and it was also like building, my home, but at the same time, I was starting a new chapter of my life. And starting that new chapter, I was able to find myself and really, enter this new phase, into this new chapter, into stepping into a different part of my life, or as a new person.
What things from your past culture
Mhm.
have you clung on to, and what things have changed?
So I find that, a foundation that I grew up with was a sense of community. When I first moved here to Florida, my first outreach was going directly to the mosque, connecting with friends and family that, had previously left New York and were now settling here to Florida, and really just leaning into the community to find out, like, hey, yes, I'm here. I'm in Central Florida, and I know of the commercial spaces that we can go and shop and get things, but like really having them help out with understanding how to look for a doctor, understanding the health system here, just like how things work in terms of social services and, groceries and produce. So it was really leaning into my community for that type of help, and support as well too, because you're also alone in a space. And I find like that is what really strengthened my ties here in Central Florida. And that's something that I always, saw my parents do as well too growing up, and it was something that I held on to and I adopt now as well.
In what ways have you connected with other cultures here and found that to be a benefit to your life?
So, one of the great benefits of living here in Central Florida is I had the opportunity of working in each of the different higher education systems. So, I've worked at Valencia College, Seminole State, and the University of Central Florida. And just in my experience through student services, it allowed me to, yes, help my community and those students as they were coming in, but then also taking that knowledge and that experience and bringing it back to the community. So, it allowed me to interact with, my neighbors. Was my local cashier at Publix that I know, they were coming to me for financial aid advice. So I think like having that experience and being somewhat, an expert in those fields allowed me to help those around me. One of the things I love doing too is checking out the local like bakeries and the food scene here in Central Florida. So it's always nice to just go and check out the different new ones that are opening. And then also kind of just spreading that around through my social media as well. That has enabled me to connect a lot with the people here throughout. I do run a food content blog online, and I've connected with a lot of other food bloggers and food content creators, digital content creators, throughout Central Florida as well.
And how has all that exposure to different foods influenced your own dining?
So I think, I mean, that's one of my favorite things to do is to check out local restaurants, local bakeries. For me personally, I love eating something at a new restaurant, tasting it, and then trying to come home and recreate it. Like it's a little challenge of mine. So just like understanding the flavor, really getting to know what type of ethnicity or where it is that I'm dining out. Learning a little bit too about the owners and those that run these establishments, and then coming back home to try and recreate it, because I feel like that's food is a connector, and it's a conversation starter. And more than anything, like I introduce myself, yes, through food. Sometimes I'll introduce myself using a cake to take it over to a neighbor. And I feel like that in itself is a connector and a way to network, because while our meals may be different, the ingredients may be the same, and it starts a conversation and like, hey, this is, we use this ingredient too, or I use this as well too, and this is how we prepare it. So I find that, if you listen closely, food will always tell a story.
And have any of those experiences influenced the way you cook something from your heritage?
Yes, most definitely. Predominantly, a lot of the produce markets that I go to here to have a lot of similar ingredients that we would use in the Caribbean. A lot in like the Hispanic markets, you'll find that in the West Indian Caribbean markets. And I think now it has allowed me to step out of my comfort zone and challenge myself to now, let's say, how I can use cassava or culantro in a different way, incorporating different root vegetables and provisions, and trying to use it as a style that they are preparing it as well too. So I think it's nice because it opens you up to, a world of different spices and different produce. And now you have the opportunity of adapting my own repertoire of recipes and incorporating something else.
Well, we thank you for adding your particular spice to our community, and thank you for talking with us today.
Thank you.
And thank you for watching this issue of Diverse Orange.